Hello again. So I wanted to take a few minutes to talk to you about the Morrison text. This is the DSM-5 text revision made easy. You're going to notice when you look at the syllabus that it looks like there are repetitive readings because I've pulled readings based on each of the diagnostic clusters as they're organized in the DSM that we will cover in the course. So why another text? When you are a budding clinician, one of the greatest challenges is figuring out how to translate what you observe in your client to the diagnostic criteria in the DSM. There are a ton of options. How do you know where you're going to go and what you're going to look at, right? And oftentimes what happens as clinicians is we will build this over time based on the prior diagnoses that our clients already have. So what your brain will do, sorry, I talk a lot about the brain, and that's because my background is in neuroscience. What the brain will do is start to stereotype. It creates these semantic clusters of information. It will start to see the types of characteristics and behaviors that you are consistently seeing in clients, and it will associate that with this is what you will notice in clients with this particular diagnosis. And it takes years to build. Not only that, it can be wrong. So how can it be wrong? As you will discover from the introduction of Morrison's text, he talks about how he did a very poor diagnosis for a client. He calls it the blown diagnosis. And that's because it's really easy to give someone a diagnosis that is not an accurate depiction of what they actually have. I'm going to use air quotes for have. Why is this? Why do we need a separate text? So the DSM itself has an overlap of symptoms across diagnoses. About 30% of all available, about 30% of the diagnoses in, so just under a third of available diagnoses have significant overlap in their symptoms. And it's really easy to diagnose someone one thing when they might actually have another. Sometimes it'll be just like a shave of ice of difference between which one is actually a more accurate depiction. This is also why, if you are currently in field, why you will see where clients will have their diagnoses change over time. Okay. It is not the end of the world if you diagnose somebody with something and then you realize later it's something else. However, what is awful is when we don't do everything that we can to reduce the likelihood of misdiagnosing someone, of not fully considering differential diagnoses. And what I mean by differential diagnoses is any other diagnosis that has symptom overlap that could potentially be what this client is struggling with, okay? Furthermore, the DSM, sorry, I get random hiccups all the time, is attempting to cluster symptoms and behaviors in a meaningful way to help give guidance for individuals, clinicians, to help create change over time and also to understand the individual, right? So if we want to help them, what are their risks? What are their challenges? What are their strengths? And how do we use this to make sense of what we need to do to help them improve their quality of life? They're all abstract. with the exception of those that are actually measured in a quantified way. What I mean by that is something that is observable and can be translated into numerics, where it is an exact science, like for example, ADHD. ADHD is diagnosed with what we call checklist diagnosing. Not a super fan of this, but it's the way that we've shifted in society for time and expense reasons and so forth. But originally, ADHD, we could observe it. We still can. We can observe it by looking at the brain. We can see structural and functional differences in the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for your executive functioning. We can see differences in the anterior cingulate cortex, the orbital frontal cortex, other areas of the frontal lobe that help promote emotion regulation, attention control, focus, logic, reason, inhibition of impulses, and so forth. It is a neurological disorder, and we absolutely have neurological evidence, observable evidence of structural and functional differences. But it is diagnosed predominantly with observable behaviors and symptoms, right? And those can overlap significantly. So when we nail things down to a point where it's like, okay, we're just going to look at these types of behaviors, these types of reported symptoms, and we're going to say that these are consistent with this disorder. We're doing it to try to save time and money, but it makes it really easy to misdiagnose someone. The Morrison text does an excellent job of really digging into that context and providing you case examples on the front end so that you don't have to spend several years trying to learn this and experience this on your own with an accurate diagnosis, because they've already been doing it for years, where they can say, this is the presentation that you're really looking for. And this is what makes it different from this and this. So it provides the context to help you more precisely assess a client and more accurately determine their diagnosis. That's the point of the Morrison text. So when you see on the syllabus where you have readings that look like they're repeats, one is the DSM, one is the Morrison text, here's what I'm doing. I'm giving you the basic information first. That's the DSM. That's the nuts and bolts of it, right? And it does provide contextual information and information about differential diagnoses and so forth. But it doesn't do a good job of helping you see how does that translate into an interaction with a client and a client's story and history. How do I merge this research science with the practice element of being with and working with a human being? That's what the Morrison text does. The Morrison text helps you bring what you experience in your office with what you are reading and seeing as diagnostic criteria in the DSM, okay? We need both of those to improve our assessment and clinical inferences, okay? All right, so that was my speech about Morrison. I have the syllabus noted for which readings go in which week, because I don't want you to go consecutively. I've kind of clustered them. Each week has clusters of disorders in the way that they kind of fit or somehow relate with each other or make sense to present them together. So we're not doing a perfect, linear trajectory through the DSM. You're going to bounce around a little bit, but it will hopefully help you create more of these semantic clusters, trying to reinforce your learning, because you're going to have a ton of content that you have to go through. Okay. All right. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. I wrote on the syllabus that you can rent the Morrison text. What you do once you rent it is your own thing. You can rent the ebook of the Morrison text, and what you do with that while you have it for 120 days is your own thing. I don't know that you'll necessarily require it after you finish the course, but if you feel like it's too much in such a short period of time, it might be helpful to have that information long term, however you accomplish that. Okay. All right. Thank you so much for listening. And you're going to see me again in this sweater in many more lectures. All right. Thanks.